As we enter the semester's middle stages, we encounter the influential early Christian theologian St. Augustine. He lived from 354 to 430 AD in the northern African region of Numidia, a southern outpost of the Roman Empire on the shores of the southern Mediterranean Sea. He is not to be confused with another St. Augustine of Canterbury, who was responsible for directing Pope Gregory I to re-Christianize the British Isles later in 597 AD. Our St. Augustine is known as a deep thinker and writer whose chronicle of his embrace of Christianity, detailed in the Confessions of St. Augustine, stands as one of the foundational texts of the so-called early Christian fathers. He is a key figure within a later generation of saints and theologians whose works enabled the proliferation of the faith across the declining Roman Empire and into the Western European world. Although we can certainly glean from his writings actual elements of Augustine's lived experience, his work is best considered something more akin to a spiritual autobiography. In fact, the spiritual meditations that Augustine chronicles capture the book's most important contributions to early Christianity. As described here, it is Augustine's retroactive reconsideration of his life experience and his confession of faith that comprises the most important sections of the book. Please take a moment to read this passage and all the others on the slides that follow. One key episode in Augustine's spiritual journey is his embrace of what was later called contemptus mundi, or a rejection of worldly pleasures, in his case the pleasures of the flesh, which he admits to enjoying readily as a younger man. Augustine wasn't alone among early church fathers in embracing this doctrine, as many embraced extreme hermetic conditions and experiences as a means of renouncing the worldly senses and orienting themselves towards higher, more spiritualized forms of reflection and meditations, the beginnings of prayer, or a means of seeking communion with God. Again, please pause and review this slide and those that follow. As he recounts and reflects on his own experience, his readers see his preoccupation with Christian concepts like grace, forgiveness, and the idea of contemptus mundi, or a rejection of the world, which become foundational concepts for Christianity as we understand it today. Again, please pause and review the contents of this slide, as well as those that follow. Even as the Confessions is a much more accessible and personal piece of writing that continues to engage and enlighten today's readers, Augustine's later and longer work, The City of God, is no less philosophical and meditative. This far-ranging discussion conjoins elements of history, politics, psychology, spirituality, and other key elements that feed into Christian doctrine. Particularly important is Augustine's effort to contrast the city of men with the city of God, a juxtaposition with intensely spiritual implications. Written in response to continuing harassment of and moral decadence within the seat of the Roman Empire in the early 5th century AD, events that eventually culminated in its fall in AD 476, Augustine contrasted the city of God, or the faithful community of elect believers, with the city of man, that unconverted and spiritually empty domain of cynical and hedonistic non-believers. Here Augustine offers what's described as a theological interpretation of human history, one that envisions the second coming as the telos, or the rapturous endpoint of human history. As the slide concludes, this view accounts for the very human habit of reconciling our worldly experiences, with all of their pain, disappointment, and disaster, with the hopeful expectation of a better life to come in a world apart, one to strive for with patient endurance of this world and a dutiful observance of one's faith practices. As we unpack the distinctions between the worldly and heavenly cities further, we can see how this distinction grew out of historical events associated with Rome's decline and with the spiritual crises that people across the empire were feeling in real time as that empire, a foundational constant in their lives and imaginations going back almost a millennium, was subject to attacks, threats, and other forms of deterioration. In a way, Augustine equates the coming loss of Rome as a sort of fortunate fall, a necessary tragedy that enables people to reconstruct their worlds in healthier, more stable, and more spiritually uplifting terms. Please review the points made on this final slide, which I hope has provided a useful thumbnail sketch of Augustine and his key works. And thank you for listening.